John, we've never met in person, so
Hello.
hello. I think you guys all know John is doing some work for us, so we've met outside of this group and kind of how I got here. So thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. Let's see.
Be all set.
All right. I always have a hard time remembering where the present button is. Let's go. I think I lost it. You guys are seeing my brain work. Can you guys see that okay this way?
Yeah, this is fine.
We'll roll with it. So anyway, thanks for having me. I know you guys probably have some familiarity with Tandem and what we're doing, and you've seen bikes. So I put together just a brief overview and introduction of things, and then some data about what we've seen so far, and then leave some time for questions. So I will jump right into it. I apologize if this is duplicative of things that you guys have learned, but
Can you formally introduce yourself?
oh, that would be really helpful, guys. So I am Kelly. I actually live in the Boston area, so pretty familiar with Portland. Certainly not a Mainer, but have a good idea of what's happening up there. I am the founder and CEO of Tandem. Quick background before I dive into the timeline is probably helpful on the Tandem side. So I worked for a previous bike share company called Zagster. They were really one of the initial players in the industry. They started to transition to scooters and sold off the bike share business kind of right around the time of the pandemic starting in 2020. So I took that opportunity and worked on connecting with someone on the software side, which is Movatic, and they're actually the software application that our program uses to operate, and decided to try to scoop up the business from Zagster and on the bike share side of things, and have had great success. So outside of Portland, in the last 2 years, we've gotten 30 markets launched. That's across the US, so not New England based. We've got markets out in California, Kansas, Pennsylvania, Atlanta area. So we're pretty widespread. So that's kind of the overview of Tandem. So last August, we submitted, well, last July, we submitted an RFP with the city. I think, as you guys know, bike share has been a long time in the making. So we worked through that RFP process and we're excited to be selected. I think a lot of the reason we were selected is we, from a Tandem perspective, try to be very community focused and collaborative. We don't want to just drop a program and take off. We want to sort of build that program with the city, with the community, and really be a part of creating a local program. And I think that that's reflective of them choosing us. And so far, I think that's something that the city has really appreciated in working with us. So you can kind of see that as the process unfolded here. The sponsor campaign kicked off that fall and winter of last year. We worked really closely with the city and some other stakeholders in that sponsorship acquisition phase to try to make the right connections and talk to the right people, and get in front of the right businesses. And we had good success in being able to move forward with Harvard Pilgrim and Maine Dot. So those two funders were able to give us enough comfort level to get the program towards implementation. I would say, you can see on the right there, the additional station sponsors. We don't have the full funding that we as an operator feel that we need to make this program sustainable long-term. We're very close, but we will need some additional location sponsors plus good, healthy ridership to make sure that we stay profitable. So then winter, we were finalizing those contracts. As some of you might know from your everyday life, working with a company like Harvard Pilgrim was not a quick and easy contract process. So that took some time. As that was happening, we worked with Bruce in the city really closely, Bruce Hyman, to work through the station permitting. So kind of what that process looked like is we suggested our best recommendations for locations, having done a quick tour of Portland and some background knowledge, and then basically did a tour with Bruce to see what was feasible based on public property. That was continuing to happen, and then throughout spring and summer was really kicked into high gear with the actual launch and planning and implementation, which includes things like securing a warehouse and hiring people like John, getting the bikes into the market, and the initial launch on 8/15. So I'll pause there. There was a lot that was happening in that time period, but that was the overall timeline from RFP until launch, most recently in August. Any questions on that? Awesome. So the next screen, I think you guys from news and updates probably are familiar with what's happening and where stations are, but the overview is there are 200 bikes. 150 of those bikes are pedal bikes, and 25 of those bikes currently are e-bikes, with 25 coming soon. So I can talk a little bit through that. It is purposeful. Portland, we're not quiet about it. Portland is our first e-bike launch. So we wanted to do that incrementally to make sure that things like bikes being found off station, theft, vandalism, were things that we had full control over. In addition to things like staffing and making sure that we were able to touch each of those e-bikes every single day, so that we were keeping track of them. So we've had great success with the first 25. So over the next month, we will begin to get the rest of the 25 out. We are up against seasonality. So with the city, we might decide to hold that till spring. But the idea is 50 of the bikes will be e-bikes for sure. And then just what our team looks like there on the ground. Portland warehouse, we've secured a van, so you might see that around town. We have 4 employees currently, 2 are full-time, 2 are part-time, and we have some open roles for additional battery swappers, balancers on the weekends, and ops manager. Right now, the ops management and sort of the oversight is happening with our director of operations, but we would like to transition that to be a local role. Next screen, we get into the fun stuff. So this is what we're seeing so far. So this date range is through 10/5. So as of last week, you'll see 2,300 rides, over 3,000 hours ridden. And this is filtered. So what we've filtered out for are any of our mechanic or people on the ground moving bikes are pulled out of that data, as well as trips that are under 5 minutes, and I think it's over 3 or 4 hours, where we have it confirmed to essentially be a failed end rental as opposed to an actual trip. So the data is scrubbed to be as accurate as we can get it. Probably no surprise here, especially as the tourist season was winding down, that the bulk of the trips have been on Saturday and Sunday, but good usage throughout the week as well. I think one of the concerns that we have is being able to provide a program to locals, and also have bikes available in key areas with tourism. So a lot of the usage initially has been right down on Commercial Street, but we've also seen a lot of usage of commutes and what we call power users, that we see multiple trips being taken, etc. So As we start to get more data, we'll start to do a better job of moving bikes to the right locations at the right time to support both of those uses. Next slide is just ride duration. 26 minutes is pretty common for a system where we consider it to be more recreational versus commute based. If this was a system that was solely commute based, that medium trip time would be somewhere around 10 or so minutes. So we're probably seeing a little bit more recreational usage, at least initially. My inclination is that over time, this will probably go down a little bit. But we'll see what those trends, you guys probably have a better idea of that than I do. And then this next slide is trips by start station and trips by end station. And over time, we would love to continue to update you guys on this data. We will start to visualize this better, where we'll have trip path data where we can show you actual routes that people are taking, as opposed to just where things are starting and ending. So more to come on that. The city is also getting that information and we'll be sharing it as well. So good data should be coming, but this is a good start for you guys to get a sense. So you can see, probably no surprise where trips are starting and ending. So if you guys, this might be a little tough to read. Let me see. The top 5 for trip starts are East End Beach, Portland Landing, which is at the start of the East Prom Trail by the ferry. Congress Street at Park Street, which has been really popular. There's a apartment building, a couple apartment buildings right there, and they've just been really high use, like power stations, power users, where they will take bikes from there to get to work. And then Commercial and Dana and Washington at Walnut. And then I think the same players for end stations, just in a slightly different order. These stars are actually stations that Harvard Pilgrim is sponsoring, so sort of insignificant to this, but as you can tell, we put some Harvard pictures here for a presentation for them as well.
I have a quick question about this. I've noticed some bikes ending up on Brackett Street at Pine Street, where there's one of those things that say you can leave your bike here, I guess.
Yep.
Is that
yeah, so those stations are on here.
Well, that was my question. Are they considered a station or just sort of a drop point?
Yeah, so in terms of our terminology and how we look at the data, they are considered stations. We sort of verbally call them a virtual station versus a physical station. But in terms of data collection, it's an actual pin in the map, which is how the user knows that it's like a official place to park. So yeah, we will start to see data from those locations on here as well.
So
Stephen, the one you're thinking of is Rosemont Market, the one at
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So I've seen bikes left there on a regular basis. So those bikes get picked up by somebody essentially overnight and returned to a station?
Nope, because they're a virtual station, we let bikes, we won't rebalance to and from there. So as long as it's an actual approved virtual station, we'll leave those bikes there.
So whoever's leaving it there is taking it again at another time, probably.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I managed that building, and I asked the owners if they knew what a virtual station was, if they had no idea that that was chosen.
That's some feedback that I think that was Zach that was speaking. And we actually are working with Bruce at the city in that Rosemont area, and actually the West End in particular. There's been a high demand. There's very little parking that we've provided in that area. And we are working to make adjustments to those racks so that not all of them are bike share racks. We want to work well and play with existing bike infrastructure.
Yeah, I haven't actually seen other bikes there per se. It's those.
Yeah.
Now, I believe, Zach, your building has inside bike parking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. And the owners were happy with it, so
Yeah,
I didn't pursue it any more than that.
I live right down the street and I noted before the meeting started that my bike was stolen. I wouldn't want to keep my bike on the street there.
Yeah, I think that that is a learning though, to be honest, Zach. I think on our implementation side, we worked really closely with the city to make sure we had the right locations. And the city went through a permit process through their end. But there was, I would say, a lack of transparency with the local businesses that were either directly in front or near those locations. So that was a learning that we're taking from this, obviously for future launches, but also outreach over the next couple months to make sure that we're at least communicating with those business owners.
Yeah, like I said, no one complained. Everyone was happy.
Yeah,
But it was
there
just-
were some complaints from other people, so.
okay.
So the next screen was actually e-bikes specifically. So obviously, as I pulled this data, we had really just started to roll the e-bikes out. So minimal, but really cool to see over a couple weeks, 188 trips. Ride duration was actually almost identical. I think it might have been identical, slightly off, a couple minutes off. So really interesting to start to see this data. Obviously, this is just a sneak peek. As we get more data, we'll do some more comparisons with the pedal side of things. And obviously, as you have more than 25 of these bikes out, we'll start to see different trends because there's certainly high demand for them. I think the toughest part, and John, I don't know if you're seeing this already on your side, is, where do we put these 25 bikes that they're going to get the most use?
Yeah, definitely. It's been very popular so far. A lot of running around, swapping out batteries. But yeah, definitely trying to balance them evenly throughout the city has been a challenge. People seem to scoop them up and find that they can ride them together with their friends and park them at the same stations. And, that doesn't always work well for getting everyone on them, but they're popular.
Yeah, so I think what we'll see is obviously, John, more bikes, the better. That'll make the operations team's job easier, but honestly, in terms of a revenue standpoint and sort of our forecast for making this system sustainable, part of that equation was understanding e-bikes usage and demand, and making sure that that was part of the revenue equation. They are double the price of a pedal bike to rent. So we're getting more revenue per trip on these assets, so that's important.
Was that drop because of weather probably?
The pricing, or
No, the 1 day drop on the rides over time.
where do you see? Oh, yes. That is typically, I don't remember that date off the bat, but yeah, exactly. We see that trend on the pedal side too, where there's a lot of zigs and zags. The weekends are high, and then rainy days, we see very little usage.
I think George has his hand up. Do you have a question, George?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna have a couple of different things that I wanted to ask. We saw a couple of cruise ships in your slide presentation, and so I just wanted to know whether you, either independently or maybe just working with the city, do you have the cruise ship schedule? I mean, obviously the big ships are the ones that are really going to drive numbers. So I just didn't know whether you've already starting to see a trend there, because I think that we want your system to be more than obviously just tourist and more than obviously just cruise ships. But I think that, like every other business in the city that can benefit from cruise ship traffic, if you're getting a 10, 15, 20% bump in revenue from those visits, and that helps sustain you, and that incremental revenue gives you, life, then we obviously want to see that correlation and understand it. So I just didn't know whether you had any data or any sense of that. I mean, they publish I think it's portcall.com has all the cruise ships coming in, and I just don't, I think they burn it off, as they leave, I think it falls off. So you may have to, if you don't have that schedule, you may have to get someone to give you the back history. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's good commentary, George. We did get that shared with us last week from Bruce at the city. So we haven't taken that and overlaid it yet, but we absolutely believe there's a correlation and an uptick. There's a couple stations. Is it like there's a station at, I don't know what we call it on here, but Custom House, it's off of Commercial. Yeah, Custom House in Forest. That station ends up completely overflowed when we see the cruise ships in town. So I don't know why they're bringing it there, but we're starting to see weird things like that. So we absolutely want to capitalize on that. But as I mentioned earlier, we're working to make sure we find a balance between capitalizing on that tourism, but also making sure there's bikes available for everyday riders, people that live in Portland and are going to be a part of the program long term.
But also, I mean, it may, to the extent that you can sort of get enough of a sense, you may be able to, maybe on big cruise ship days, maybe you add a part-time worker or somebody to help you, do more stuff that day because you're going to get a big bump. But I think it's also, nobody on the cruise ships really knows about you, right? They literally have to discover it when they get on.
See it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Awesome. Well, I think that's it on our end. I know you guys have some additional meeting items, so don't want to hold you over, but I'm really glad that you guys asked to have me join and present. I'm happy to do this, if it's twice a year, quarterly, if there are items that you guys have brainstormed where you think we can work collaboratively, or even just feedback for how we can improve, we're all ears. So just let us know how we can help.
Yeah, I think we might have a question from Zach.
Oh, I didn't see it. Sorry, Zach.
Yeah, let's see. I have a few questions. I'll see if we're doing real quick. Do you envision how far out do you envision these stations going? We have these corridors, Washington Avenue, Forest Avenue, Congress Street. Do you expect people to do a 3 mile, 5 mile?
Yeah, we expect to expand off of the peninsula for sure. I think this initial season, we wanted to get it mostly on the peninsula, to get it launched, to get proof of concept, making sure that we're able to do it profitably. But you're correct. The next phase is to head down each of those corridors. So I do know Washington Ave was one of them. Forgive me for not being local, but there was a second one that runs out, is UNE off of the two universities.
Forest Avenue and Stevens Avenue.
The East Deering neighborhood, sort of across the way, South Portland. So I think both us and the city have a strategy for what that will look like. It's just a matter of the timing.
Okay. And also did you work at all with the previous city manager or only this city manager?
Only current city manager.
Okay. The other day I walked by and I saw an e-bike lit up. And so I said, oh, it looks like I might be able to ride it. So I rode it up and down the block and then stuck it back.
That should not happen. So that is a signal. So the light on does mean that it's like in a rental. So typically if you went up to a station, the lights should be off, as an example. So I'm interested actually about your ride, what happened.
Can somebody do that remotely and then get to the bike? Could somebody have done it from home and then?
We can't rent from afar. So what it likely is somebody had an issue ending their ride and sort of what we call abandon the bike. Yeah.
I didn't want to go too far because, full disclosure, I saw a non-e-bike and I thought that was unlocked. So I thought I'd test ride that, and I got about a half a block before it locked up on me.
Yeah.
I didn't want that to happen, a heavy e-bike.
Yeah, so the e-bikes, there's a couple things in place to prevent vandalism or theft. So that's one of them, which is there are zones that are essentially drawn. So essentially a service area, and a rider will see that when they're in the app. And if they cross over that service area for safety reasons, the bike's not going to just stop while they're riding the bike. But if they were to stop moving the bike, it would then lock up and wouldn't allow them to keep moving.
Uh-huh.
So that's one example. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. of
Have
course.
you, have you found any theft or vandalism problems yet?
Minimal. So there's the standard like sort of tagging of bikes that happens. You maybe have seen it. Sir John has seen it in his travels, moving bikes and checking batteries. So our team has done some like general cleaning. We've had a few bikes that have been sort of what we call off system. So our pedal bikes, even though they don't have GPS, we have tile trackers on them. So it's our version of GPS. So we can see those bikes when they are not where they're supposed to be. So there's probably about 6 bikes that have, since we've launched, been sort of what we call rogue. We have a process internally for how to handle that. Obviously we go out and try to recover it. And then we actually reach out to the last rider of those bikes and impose charges to get more information. So it happens. There is definitely bike loss. So as part of our business model, we anticipate in any bike share system, we're going to see about 10% bike loss annually based on the number of bikes. So if there's 200 bike system, we will see 20 bikes lost. It's built into our business model. Obviously, we try to minimize that, but it's part of the business.
I'll also add that I've, in my travels, noticed a few of them, the e-bikes specifically, left off peninsula, occasionally in people's driveways,
Yeah.
kind of, maybe riding them home from the bar and, just leaving it there, which myself and the other battery swappers end up bringing them back to an actual station. But yeah, that does happen.
So is that person get charged until it gets back to a station?
So the charging is actually, John is one of our battery swappers. So the
No, does
station-
that person get charged for using the bike?
Oh, they do until this, yep, until the ride ends. So the last rider will continue to be charged. So they'll get, I've seen charges in our back end of like $600, and then they freak out and reach out. And we say, well, did you have an issue ending your ride? And we try to educate them and help make improvements. The other thing, without describing in too much detail, but the original intent of these bikes in Tandem specifically is obviously station based. So they're on the pedal bikes, you've seen the cable that attaches from the bike to the station. Our anticipation was actually to have that occur on the e-bikes. Based on the lock technology, we were unable to do that. So we are actually currently testing a couple changes in the software that essentially, with the GPS location, requires them to be at a station within X amount of radius before they can end a trip. There's some customer service concerns with that, right? So like if someone's Wi-Fi isn't working correctly, if the GPS is off and they can't end and they get charged, they get very upset. So we're trying to balance sort of missing bikes with customer support and making sure that we're taking care of riders and that the system's working well for them when they're riding. So it's a tricky balance, but we've been doing a lot of testing to help minimize bikes being left off station.
Is there a phone number you can call 24 hours a day?
Yep, there's a phone number. It's on the pedal bikes. It's on the stations. Yep.
I just had a couple questions, Kelly.
Yeah.
One you alluded to, and that was South Portland. So you mentioned that possibly being a growth area. So have you been in touch with the city there? And
yeah, a little bit.
That kind of underway?
I would say not at a serious level to this point. I'm really sorry, I'm forgetting his name, but he joined us at the launch celebration on their sustainability team. Actually, there's a picture of him in here. He was a model for us. So we've had sort of like initial conversations, and he is working and speaking with Portland to try to understand what that could look like. But I would say that's probably like a year or so off.
Okay.
And then there has been outreach from other towns, I'd say in the region, but not directly connected to Portland. There's a lot of interest, I think, regionally to see expansion, whether that's a regional program or just more tandem programs locally.
And then the last question that I had was just about seasons. So you mentioned,
Yeah.
I was curious what you're working.
Yeah, this is a good
around
topic
that.
for you guys, actually. So we, in year one, are planning to remove the bikes the first week in December and put them back out in April. We are not opposed as an operator to keeping a percentage of bikes going through the winter. I think the city wanted to kind of stay on the side of caution initially. But if we get a high volume of local riders that start to depend on the bikes for commuting and are advocating for it, I think we'd be willing to give it a shot. The station infrastructure for the most part will stay out. So we'll scoop the bikes up, bring them to our warehouse, and the stations will stay out, except for a few instances where there's concerns about things like, plows ruining things. But for the most part, the stations will stay put.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I have a quick, I guess I have like observationally, I appreciate the bikes. They seem well thought out and put together with fenders and dynamo lights, which makes a lot of sense to me. They're actually a lot like the bike I ride around town that I own. In that way, mine's a little different, but I guess from your perspective, and kind of, our focus is often like, infrastructure, and where it is, often like sluggish in its implementation or lacking entirely. And, kind of briefly, how does Portland compare with other cities where you're located in terms of like bicycle infrastructure? Like, is this really challenging? Is it average?
That's a good question. I would say overall it's average. The reason why I kind of lean average is there's a lot of communities we're in where the cities are more sprawling and less dense. So they might have great infrastructure like in one immediate area and then it just doesn't exist. And we'll have stations where really the only safe way to ride is on a sidewalk. Which is scary. I would say that you guys, from what I've seen, and we've done a couple days where I've been in town and riding around, I would probably say average to better. You guys probably don't perceive it that way because there's probably a lot of connection points that could be improved. But in terms of general safety, the other thing I would say is might be skewed by tourist season, but there's a lot of cars, but they seem to be slower, right, because of the traffic. So I know me personally riding in Portland felt really safe. Even though there wasn't a bike lane, it felt like there was space and that people were driving slow enough. That's just probably a skewed perception. I live in Boston and ride here with craziness. But anyway, I think that there's a couple anecdotes already though. So we were working with Allagash, obviously they are off the peninsula. They are sponsoring a station, but we're very apprehensive to put a station out even towards their direction because of the safety of getting out there and what that looks like.
There's like sort of a way to do it on trails, but your bikes aren't really trail bikes, and it also takes a wicked long time.
Yeah, and that might be like, that's probably a pretty unique example. But I think that's something over time, your feedback would be helpful as we try to expand off the peninsula, because I think my perception is really skewed, right? Because it's mostly on the peninsula and things are pretty dense and it's pretty safe. as we start to make those connections where we try to get from, communities where people are living to get downtown, that's a completely different scenario. And I think we want to be really mindful of where we put those stations.
Right. And I think, Bruce has been working on like the neighborhood byways system. And that's something that I think is really clever and fairly well done. And it might be worth working that into your app or something, if that's a
I know that we
possibility.
use that for planning purposes to actually recommend stations initially. So that's like a really great idea. Yeah.
Or even showing, I don't know, I haven't actually used the app, so I'm not sure how it works, but.
Lee, I just wanted to ask you, this Allagash anecdote you just gave us, was that explicitly because they obviously are in the alcohol business, or was it just general safety?
That's a good question. Just general safety. So from a bike perspective.
That was a very lawyer question for you to ask.
Well, I mean, the thing is, obviously they don't want people drinking and driving no matter what the vehicle or mode is, right? But I do think that they have a special responsibility that they're encouraging people to go out there to their tasting room and then drive around on a bike, maybe having one or two drinks,
I'm actually surprised the number of bikes I see around tasting rooms, just in general. But that does. They will drink and ride a bike.
It's actually funny because we had worked with Rising Tide to try to get a location there, and unfortunately it didn't work out. But they were strongly advocating for beer passes, essentially, right? Which is you could pay X dollars for a pass on the bike for the day to hop from bar to bar, and I was like, that people would probably pay for this, but I don't know that that's a safe thing.
Right, it's a great idea for the first 3, and then.
Are you aware that Boston Sports Radio is do you operate in Boston?
We don't actually.
Oh, okay. Are you aware that they are very anti-bike on Boston Sports Radio?
I wasn't aware of that. Actually.
Oh, absolutely anti-bike.
All right.
Yeah, just thought you should be aware of that.
Yeah.
I just want to share a quick question from the chat before we roll up here. Emma asks, is there a timeline for rolling out off peninsula stations?
Yeah, I think that we will start to see the initial wave of that in the spring. So as we relaunch for next year, it won't be in a significant way. I know that we're working with the Root Institute, who's developing out in East Deering. Their project will not be done, but they're actually very interested in starting to get some stations in that general neighborhood. And then a few other key points in working with the city. So I'd say we will start it in the spring and then start slowly pushing things out.
I'd like to weigh in favor of a winter program. I ride every day. I
think coming.
People who are avid cyclists would like the winter thing, because let's say people would ride during the winter, but they like to put their nice bike away.
Yeah.
They don't like it getting slime, so they might ride a bike share bike on nicer days, or someone who does ride all winter long, but on a really slushy day, say, oh, well, let me take an e-bike and not worry about sliming my own bike. Yeah, I mean, it's a small percentage, but the idea is to grow it.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback, and I think where we might land initially, Zach, is what we've done in some other markets is basically take away a percentage, right? So let's not operate a full 200 bikes. Maybe we drop it to 100 and put them in areas that we know are more commuting focused. So that's something that we've talked about.
On the topic of winter operations, one thing that we focus a lot on in our group is the sidewalk snow clearance. So we would ask that if you do keep stations out in the winter, to consult with the Parks Department to make sure that any stations left out, any bikes left out on the sidewalks wouldn't interfere with their already difficult operations of keeping our sidewalks clear of snow.
That's good feedback, John. I know that it's actually a good reminder to check back with the city on that because it's now October 11th. And we've kind of anecdotally talked about that, which is like stations can stay out unless they're in the way, but we don't know which ones are in the way.
Yeah, I think going forward, I'll try to think of, and I think we can all try to think of, if there's, an issue that we're writing a letter on or pushing that
Yeah.
might help your program through infrastructure to be more successful, we'll try to let you know. And kind of similarly, as these numbers that we're seeing, as this data gets better, I think that might be a great insight to have on like, what, because I think Portland has some kind of shocking avenues where like you have a road that looks like no one would ever ride their bike on it. You stand there and you watch and 12 people go by in an hour.
Yeah.
So yeah. George mentions maybe doing this quarterly. Maybe we could have another meeting together in the spring once you get things going again, and we have like another, a month's worth of numbers into the spring or something like that. And we'll kind of try to keep you in the loop. Because some of those things like, Brighton Avenue, for instance, which is this big arterial thing that a lot of people live on, is up for redesign in the coming years. And that's kind of like, maybe that's happening this fall. The main DOT can be kind of slow in telling people what's going on, which we're experiencing, but, having, you show up, or write a letter
Yeah.
in support of some kind of quality separated bike lane along Brighton Avenue might be helpful in terms of, like if this was here, we would feel comfortable, like putting a station here so people could get to these businesses or get to downtown if they live there. But, as it is, portions of Brighton Avenue are a 4-lane road with no bike lane. So I'll try to make a note of letting you know when we get to that Brighton Avenue thing and other opportunities like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to be advocates for that. Our goal is to get more people on more bikes. We don't just say that. That's why I'm doing this. So definitely keep me updated. And anything I can do to help and vice versa. I'm really glad you guys had me join.
Yeah, thanks so much. And winter in Maine is great for brainstorming and getting ready for the spring.
Yeah.
So it's not just for leafing through garden catalogs. It'll also be talking to you and brainstorming about ways you can really hit the ground running in the spring.
Awesome.
I would also, it can be a little different, but I think sometimes it's a good way to see like regional opportunities. People post all kinds of things. I think you'd be welcome to join our listserv too, which is a Google group, which is sort of like a discussion forum. And you can join it and get a digest email. You can get regular emails, or you can even like not see any of the emails and just view it as an online forum.
Okay.
And I can invite you via email.
That would be amazing.
Or I can get your email from John, but that can be a good way to see like what local people are complaining about, or someone might point out like that's where we'll be talking about the Brighton thing, and I can try to forward you an email specifically to make sure you get it. But it could be a good idea, to kind of, if you're ever like, what's Portland talking about bikes, like that's
No, we are. That topic comes up a lot actually. So that's awesome.
Yeah. All right.
Great. Thanks, guys. And what I'll do is I'll send that presentation. I guess I have John's email. Is it okay, John, if I send it over to you to share with the group?
Yeah, totally. I'll post that along with the recording. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. And then you have my info, and if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, guys. See ya.
Thank you.